So quite the ill-tempered exchange between Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer at Prime Minister's Questions yesterday. The Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, getting into that as well, telling everybody to calm down. It's interesting as well because Sir Keir Starmer said immediately after that actually Labour had put in something like 100 written questions about this issue of safety in schools. Tim Clark is a former head teacher. Tim, thank you for joining us this morning. What do you make of this crisis? And it is a crisis in our schools.
Morning, Peter. Good to see you. Yeah, how do you follow that?
It's hard to know where to start, isn't it?
If I'm honest, I suppose I point the finger at everybody. Yes, of course, there have been cuts. There's no question about that. There have been cuts. And bearing in mind what's happened recently, those cuts are regrettable. The fact that I think now it's 17 head teachers have come forward and said we put in condition surveys saying we needed more money. They were turned down, and now their schools are closed because they're unsafe. There have been several revelations like that. And of course, then the revelation that money's being spent on the DFE building, which just add to people's
that was brought up yesterday at Prime Minister's Questions as well. Something like £46 million being spent on the actual head of the offices of Gillian Keegan, the Education Secretary, not just her office. I mean, that would be a lot of money spent on office, but the Department for Education.
Yeah, but to be honest, that's a red herring because that money comes from a different budget. That's not coming from the school's budget. But
nonetheless, the government appears to be able to find money to do up their offices for the Department for Education, but not to do up schools that our children have crumbling concrete in.
There has been this perfect storm of revelations. There's no question about that. But on the other hand, I get incredibly angry at this faux anger from Labour because there is no doubt about it, when Labour was last in power, they did spend billions on school buildings. There's no question about that. But that money was spent on the whole, high-tech, glamorous, state-of-the-art new schools or rebuilds. And their policy of building schools for the future did benefit hundreds of schools. And I'm not criticising that. But there are thousands of schools in this country, and there are many schools, therefore, that got nothing from Labour. Now, bearing in mind, we have masses of schools that were built in the 60s. There was a massive building programme in the 60s because of raising the school leaving age, the baby boom and post-war, replacing schools that have been bombed and what have you. Now, if RAAC has a 30-year life expectancy, that means it ran out in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Well, there have been warnings of this since 1994, yeah.
So Labour did nothing about it. And I just used the word that Candice used in your previous interview, that what Labour did not do was look at the unglamorous side of things. The money they spent on these high-tech schools could have been spread around all the country.
But they would argue, surely would they not, Tim, that they actually did do something about it by rebuilding a lot of schools? I mean, that did get rid of all...
Yes, that is precisely their argument. But it only benefited a small percentage of schools. It did not... I mean, we've got over 20,000 schools in this country. Their policies probably benefited hundreds of schools, not thousands. And I think the only way forward now is that there needs to be a national condition survey of our schools. I'm sure medics would say the same for hospitals, but there needs to be a national condition survey which sets out clearly a differentiated, graduated level of need. What needs doing now, urgently, it needs doing now. What needs doing soon, what needs doing in the medium future, what needs doing in the long term. And then to allocate the money accordingly. Now, that is the exact opposite of building schools for the future, which went for these high-tech, glamorous, state-of-the-art schools. This is starting with probably many things that are unnoticed, a new roof here, a new staircase there. But to do it that way is, I think, the best value for money. It's the fairest, but above all, it puts safety first.
Maybe politicians wanted to open nice, new, glamorous schools and say we're building these wonderful new state-of-the-art facilities rather than, as you say, that unglamorous thing of, well, there's a sports hall that's got RAAC in it, let's replace the roof.
Yeah, absolutely.
There aren't too many wonderful opportunities to just go, well, we've got a new roof and we needed one.
And that is it. That I think we've now got to go back to basics and we've got to do the unglamorous way. I'm not criticising those new builds. I was ahead of one of them, but
you were happy to get one.
Yes. I didn't complain, but I think the money could have been better spent. And of course, as one of your earlier callers said, was of course Labour in 2010 left the country without money. We can't forget Liam Burns' note.
Yeah, there is no money left. Let me ask you about one other issue before you go. This is Rishi Sunak considering abandoning plans to ban children from changing gender at schools. This idea of social transitioning, where children who say they are trans demand to be referred to by a different pronoun and wear the uniform of the opposite sex. Tim, what do you make of this story? What do you think should happen?
Well, simply, there needs to be absolute clarity. It's not for me, it's not for heads to make this decision. This decision does need to come from our elected politicians, because it's much deeper than just what goes on in schools. Schools were promised under Nadeem Sahawi last year when he was Secretary of State, advice on how to cater for trans and non-binary pupils, the use of pronouns, uniforms and this sort of thing. Schools are still waiting for that guidance. Now, schools are dealing with this problem today. They were dealing with it last term. And it's the sort of issue that if a school gets wrong, it only takes a litigious parent to take the school to court. Schools desperately need this advice. I say it's not for me to say what that advice should be, but there needs to be absolute clarity. But the reason, Peter, why I say this is a deeper issue is because it's really an issue for society. One of the things schools are required to do by Ofsted is to prepare children for life in 21st century Britain. Well, what is 21st century Britain? Is it a non-binary country, or isn't it?
Yeah. And the government needs to make up its mind, doesn't it? Yeah, Tim, thank you very, very much indeed. That's Tim Clark, former head teacher, there talking to us.